Ladies and gentlemen, Kirk Thatcher and Darren Doctorman, the Weirded Beardos. And here we are. Kirk is in the middle of a very important phone call.
I gotta run, babes. All right, George. Love you, man. See you at the museum. Okay. All right. No, the force is strong in you. Okay, bye. Oh, sorry, I didn't know we were.
Oh, welcome back. That was George Soros, by the way, not Lucas.
It was, yeah. He's a big Star Wars fan, funding all these protests. You know, we all get paid to go.
Well, welcome again to another Weirded Beardos. We are bearded, but we're not weirdos. We're Beardos. We're weirded Beardos. I wish people would understand that, but
yeah,
they just don't.
They don't like the way we've mangled the English language.
Well, it's all right. We're manglers. We're the wacky manglers, or the Macky Wanglers.
Wacky Wanglers. There you go. I think we're renaming our show.
So thanks for coming back. We've been dark for a couple weeks, but here we are again.
We don't get that dark.
You always got to take it there.
Got to take it to
I don't understand why.
Got to make it racist. Bunch of dang crackers here on this show.
Thanks for joining us. We have a wonderful guest today.
Amazing guest. 6 times nominated for an Oscar. 2 wins. 2 Oscar wins.
So
pay attention.
1 out of 3 is what we're saying.
Yeah, Emmy, Oscar. If he gets a Grammy, he'll have an ego.
Or an EOG.
Or if he gets a Tony, he'll have a toe.
Well, let's bring him in without further ado. The great Mark Mangini.
Mark Mangini, ladies and gentlemen. Don't applaud yourself. That's our job.
I was blushing just a moment ago. Thanks for giving me a peek.
I was flushing just a minute ago, but I ran into the. How are you, buddy? Okay.
Yeah, life is good. I aspire to the ego or an EGAD. Or
I like the toe, a Tony Oscar.
A toga. That's what I want. What's that? A Tony, an Oscar, a Grammy, and
an Academy Award.
I want a toga. I'll be the first.
Nice.
So, full disclosure, I've known Mark for decades, and we became really good pals, kind of between Gremlins 1 and Star Trek 4, due to our love of Looney Tunes and Warner Brothers sound effects and just general film trivia and idiocy. So, when I was thinking, like, who should we have as a guest? I'm like, well, duh. And so, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Marcus Manginius.
What's the full disclosure part? You usually say that when you have to reveal some untoward relationship.
Exactly. Well, I had to. I just outed you. You've known me for decades, and you haven't,
It's because this is an intervention with the Treg Brown Appreciation Society.
Hi, my name is Mark. And I'm a cartoon sound freak.
Hi, Mark.
Thanks for having me.
Traditional welcome and handshake. Yeah, all right.
Nice.
So, what we usually do is get a little bit of background. So, where you grew up, how you got into movies, and then we'll get into the deep weeds on what you've done and how you did it.
Oh God.
You didn't grow up in LA, and no one in the family was in the business. You're not a Nipple baby, yeah.
No, nothing of the sort. I grew up in the suburbs of Boston, Massachusetts, a little town called Sudbury, and I came to LA. I never told you this, Kirk, but I was making claymation and stop motion animation films as a kid, and that was really what I loved to do. But because I grew up where I grew up and grew up in the family I grew up in, I didn't know that was something one could aspire to. Or make a career out. It just seemed like, oh no, those are movie people. We don't do that. So I went to college and studied foreign languages, which would of course help me in my Gremlins endeavors much later in life.
One time.
Yeah. Well, let's get into that. We'll
get there. So wait, your family. What was the family business, or was everybody did everything, but there was not like you're going to be a lawyer and a doctor? Or?
Making babies and advertising executive.
La Familia. Oh, that's what you're. So Okay, so you weren't showing any inclination to work in the showbiz, so your parents were like, "You need a real job." So languages was like, sure, that's respectable. You spoke Italian at home.
No, in fact, my even though I'm 100% Italian, I'm second generation. My father and mother wanted us to assimilate. We were the sons and daughters of immigrants, first generation immigrants to America, and they wanted us to become Americans, so much so that they named my oldest brother Chip, about as white and an American as you can imagine.
Chip Mangini. Yeah.
It flows, doesn't it? There's a great rhythm to it.
Chip,
wow,
my
okay.
legacy.
So where'd you go to college? In Boston? In Boston?
No, in Worcester, Massachusetts, at Holy Cross College, and I studied Spanish, Italian, and Russian, and only because it was the only thing I was good at coming out of high school. What I did know at that age was college was important. One should get an education, and I never did. I ended up dropping out of college, effectively being kicked out because I realized that wasn't for me. I want to go to California, but I was hedging my bets and I applied for leave of absence, and they said, no, you're not coming back.
No.
Wow. And you wanted to go to Cali to do what? Not languages.
Make movies.
You decided at that point, I want to work in films.
I had one of those epiphany. Well, the epiphany was really attributable. I saw the Academy Awards on TV in 1975, and a light bulb went off. Like, whoa, wait a minute! I love making movies. That's what I really love doing in my spare time. I'm gonna pursue that. There should be a John Williams score underneath this. I'm going to break out into song, and I'm going to Hollywood. But I knew nothing. I didn't know the difference between a director and a producer.
Right. And your family, what were there? Because I always curious how families like, you're crazy, or were they like, good, go with God? What was their reaction, more or less?
Yeah, more go with God. They have, all my life I've dreaded the family response, like when I knocked a girl up, hey, mom and dad, I think I'm going to be a dad. Oh, you got to get married. Mom and dad, I want to drop out of college. I know you just dropped a chunk of change. Mom and dad, I want to go to Los Angeles. I got nothing going on. And
you're the black sheep.
So it doesn't speak well of my parents, God rest their souls, but they always have given me their blessing to pursue.
No, that speaks very well of your parents.
Oh, it does?
At least in being supportive. They weren't like, Kai, smack your face. I mean, come on. Anyway, so you come to California, you don't know anybody, and you don't know nothing.
That's right.
So when you start working, how do you matriculate? The business?
A series of unintended consequences. I'm living with a friend of my dad's in his guest house, and getting what's shocking to me in retrospect is how fucking stupid I was. Really, all I knew is I had this desire to come to LA. I knew nobody. I didn't even try once I landed to try to get a job. I just, because I'm a guitarist and a musician, I floundered. I would go to guitar shops. I would be an annoyance at Guitar Center and McCabe's, and I'd go to all the guitar shops and thinking, well, I don't know how to make this movie career work, but maybe somebody will find me in one of these guitar shops.
Be discovered. Yes.
Yeah, this is so pathetic.
The old Schwab's technique. Instead of the soda counter, you're sitting there going, dude.
Why is it in the presence of YouTube, I am telling the worst version of my life story possible?
No, it's great. It's great.
I've never heard someone play Stairway to Heaven that good before. Let's sign this guy up.
You have completely summed it up.
Jerry Goldsmith.
Right. So, 3 months in, I've run out of the $1,000 I brought with me to cover me, and fortuitously, I run into the guy whose guest house I'm staying with in the garage one day. He's never home. He's always on the road. He was a manager of talent, and he said, "How's it going? Not good. What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I used to make animations as a kid." And okay, great, bye. Next day, he calls and says, "Call this number," and it was a friend of his who was an executive at Hanna-Barbera Studios, the great Saturday morning cartoon sausage factory.
huge in the 70s. They were like
Scooby-Doo, the Flintstones, Huckleberry Hound, you name it. And he got me an interview, and I panicked because I was worried he represented me as an artist, which I'm. Let's have a contest to see who can draw the worst. I will win that. And anyways, it was just a general meeting. He met me. He was lovely, and he said, if something comes up, I'll let you know. And the first thing that came up was a training program in the sound department. And I took that training program, and we were told that if the networks ordered, this was in like June of that year, the networks ordered programs, they would offer us jobs. And that year they had 5.5 hours of orders for NBC, ABC, and CBS. And they offered me a job as a trainee apprentice in the sound department. And then the rest is kind of history.
What was the first project you worked on for them?
Flintstones. And then
were you cutting mag track or what? I mean, what were you doing?
I started life as something called a track reader, a very obscure part of the animation process, whereby, as you may know, you have to record the voices first in animation, and then you draw it to that for lip sync and action. Someone has to transcribe those voices frame by frame on an exposure sheet to tell the animator where to open them. Hey, boo boo. Let's get some picnic baskets. That was my job to.
So you're marking down. I've seen these sheets; they're voluminous,
right?
And you're putting letters like "Hey" would be HEY, and then you're literally marking it on lines for each
individual frames. And there's of course hundreds of thousands of frames in a 30-minute cartoon. It's tedious mechanical work that computers can now do, but back then human beings did that. And it was a great education. It was a great education in listening and analyzing sound. And because I was a musician, I had a pretty good train, and I still have a good trained ear. It made me good at it. And so they graduated me to assistant editor and then sound effects editor, the premier position in that department, where you were making funny noises and applying them to funny physics in the cartoons. And
so you were actually making sounds at that point, even for Hanna-Barbera. I know they had a huge library, but you were making stuff too.
Well, I was the only one. You know, Hanna-Barbera, much like the the Treg Brown library, or the Jimmy McDonald library at Disney, were codified, like set in amber. Things that never changed over millennia, it seemingly.
And so used that they were immediately recognizable.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, just, you can,
running, all that. Novel. That, by the way, Kirk, that would become my holy grail. The minute I hit that sound department and it all started to click in, all the cartoons I watched as a kid, I remembered that sound and thought, I must have that sound. And it wasn't a Hanna-Barbera sound.
Right.
I didn't know where to get it. And so thus began my Indiana Jones search for the trombone gobble.
And why we became friends early on. Later.
One of the many reasons.
So, hey, did Joe Siracusa work there?
Joe Citarella.
Okay, there was a Joe Siracusa who was part of the Spike Jones band who was cutting sound.
No, that's yes, one of the Spike Jones performers, Earl Bennett. Earl Bennett was one of my mentors and taught me everything.
That's amazing, because Joe Siracusa was at Marvel Animation working on whatever they were doing when like Muppet Babies and all that. And so he was another guy from. It's funny. So that's maybe not.
No, but those were geniuses. Those were guys that were telling stories with sound and abusing musical instruments. And how do you take a sousaphone? You can't see. There's my sousaphone. How do you take that and make a fart sound with it? What do you do with?
And in fact, there are 8 ways.
That's the title of your book, 8 Ways to Make a Fart. Wait, so are there any Hanna-Barbera sound effects that you can say, that is mine, I made that?
No, I'll never know, because by the time I landed in 1976, it hadn't changed in years.
Right.
And my library was something I built up as kind of a private collection that only lived in my edit room. And when I left the studio, I have no idea what happened to it. They probably gave it to somebody and somebody's using it.
Right.
But I don't listen to cartoons anymore, so I don't know if anybody started using. I use those sounds.
Right. I remember you can now buy the Hanna-Barbera sound effects library in the Warner Brothers. I mean, you can buy them on a CD, like a 20 CD set, which immediately bought in the 90s, I think, or early 2000s.
Yeah, I own it.
Okay, so you're in Hanna-Barbera, and you said then you left with your bag of tricks, and where did you go, and how did you end up on Gremlins?
I had a mentor, Bill Kowalchuk, who left for Paramount Studios. And he got a job in live action. That's where grown-ups work and real movies get made, and it's in Hollywood, California. And I got jealous, and I thought that's what I want to do. And I begged him to get me an interview, and he did, with Howard Baldy Beals, who was 150 years old at that time. He had worked on the 10 Commandments with Cecil B. DeMille, and he interviewed me and gave me an offer to come over as a demotion, again as an apprentice, because I had no skills in live action, and I jumped at it, even though it was a demotion in title.
Right.
It was about the same pay as an apprentice, and he gave me to one of their staff editors to watch and learn under, a gentleman by the name of John Hanley, who I am deeply indebted to for the training he gave me. And I'll just finish out that story for one more minute. John Hanley at the time was working on Star Trek: The Motion Picture, one of the most anticipated movies of the year, or for a decade since the end of the TV series. And I was training on Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Fate would intervene, and Sean would get very ill and have to leave the movie. Wow. And when he asked Robert Wise, yes, that Robert Wise, when Robert Wise asked him who should replace him, he said, "Take the kid." Wow. And when I was in a department of 50 old union, guys.
That's wow, you have me pointing at you.
That was stepping on me hard. For sure.
You had moxie, kid.
Yeah.
Wow. So
what a break.
Darren worked on the redo, or what do you call it, Darren?
We call it the Director's Edition. Once in 2000, and then again in 2022.
I just thought I was invited, probably by a good friend of yours, at the Dolby Theater in Hollywood.
David Fine.
Yeah, just a few months ago. It was fantastic.
I think that's one of the times that I talked to you.
Yeah, that's of course.
So the famous bow that was used in that movie, was that an Emil musical instrument or a sound effect? Because
that's the blaster beam. That's in the music.
That's Craig Huxley.
Yes.
Okay, that's that's music, not sound. Because it's what I loved about Goldsmith. A lot of his scores sort of cross the line between sound effects and music,
especially that score. And as you clearly know, Emil Richards was a featured percussionist performer in Jerry's score, and he brought rub rods and the blaster beam and a whole host of crazy sounding things
and that thing that sounds like a metal gate, the squeaking gate. It's amazing.
Yeah.
His truck, sadly he has passed away, but he was sort of the godfather of weird instruments that kind of turn into like found object music sounds.
Right.
And I know Goldsmith used them even back on Planet of the Apes with the water phones and all that.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So you're there with all these great sounds and music things, and you're still sound editing. You're not into mixes yet, or do you start going to mix because of?
No, I don't really start crossing over till the late 80s.
It sounds like you're asking about the progression from sound editing to mixing. And if
Thank you, AI. May I have another?
Why are you talking, you dumb piece of phone?
You've been outed.
You need to turn the pod around so that Hal can't read your lips. That's what you need to do.
I thought I saw no AI used in this podcast.
And I didn't even say, "Hey, Google."
Stop saying, "Hey, Google." I mean, not that. Yes.
Hey, Siri. Okay,
Where
so
were we?
you were
Oh my
talking
God.
about you didn't get into sound editing and in the
Mixing.
mixing.
He didn't
Right.
get mixing till the
Right.
late
In the late
80s.
80s. So you
Right.
were cutting sound and designing any, or no? Still just
Yes.
cutting. And, yeah.
Very quickly jumped into. I fashioned myself after Ben Burt. He was an icon to me and still is to this day.
Yeah.
And I thought that's what I want to be. I want to be that person in charge that's recording the sounds and designing the sounds and editing the sounds and having a major impact on what the audience experiences sonically. So I wanted to be Ben Burt.
Me too. When I got because during high school, I was messing around with sound stuff. I had a reel-to-reel recorder in my closet and mixers and all that sort of stuff. And I really wanted to do that work. And my first few jobs were as sound editing on film. But in '85, when I was graduating high school, I found his phone number and I called him.
What?
Because he was listed.
In LA or in San Francisco?
Up north, yeah.
Yeah.
And I called him and I said, "Listen, I'm going to USC next semester. Do you have any advice for me?"
Wow.
And he was so gracious and nice, and he gave me the names of a couple people to talk to at SC, Ken Mura, who was the big teacher there, and a couple other people. And he was so kind and understanding. He said, "Look, 10 years ago, this was me, so I completely understand." But he was great, and I've had a little contact with him over the years. But yeah, he's like he is all the heads on the big. My mind is going. I can feel it.
Hey, yeah.
I'll complete that sentence.
Yeah.
I can't.
Mount Rushmore. He's all the heads on Mount Rushmore.
All right. And a couple of hands.
Goodness. Yeah.
Well,
Okay, so you did Star Trek.
Yeah.
It comes out.
Yeah.
It gets nominated for stuff. Does it get nominated for sound?
No, it did not. Stunningly, in spite of the fact that we spent over a year in post-production on it. One of the great challenges of Star Trek was that it had been originally, the visual effects had been farmed out to Bob Abel and Associates, a well-known commercial outfit who couldn't deliver the goods. And they had to switch to Doug Trumbull's company very, very late in the piece, which meant starting from scratch, and where we should have been designing for sounds for VFX that should have been done months ago.
Ran out of time.
We ran out of time. And so we are literally, Doug sends a temp version of a sound, maybe just a wireframe, and then, or a model on a green screen. And we're making sounds to incomplete shots right up to the very last second of the mix. It was really,
and that sound mix was really hobbled because you didn't have any Foley, you didn't have any, a bunch of stuff wasn't cut in, and it was just they just threw everything in and hoped for the best.
It was a painful mix, partially because of the rush, but partially because I think of Bob's aesthetic. Bob did not like Foley,
right?
And secondarily, because that was a practical set, the bridge of the Enterprise, all those screens were rear projection film clattery projectors. So we had to ADR
in a big echoey dome.
Yeah, in a big echo. Well, we ended up doing ADR for almost all of the dialogue in the film, which of course leaches a great performance of its authenticity and believability. And so it always felt stilted and staged and awful. We had dry ass ADR, which begged for Foley, and Bob wouldn't let us put it in. And we're rushed to do it all at the same time. I mean, we didn't make the voice of V'ger till the last day of the mix.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Wow.
I mean, we're lucky we got any film at all. Truly.
Well, so you were out of the frying pan into the fire. You realize how movies are made.
Yeah.
And so you're at Paramount as part of the sound department.
Yeah.
And what comes next? I mean, up until, and then you're suddenly Gremlins in 84, 85, or 83.
So right after I finished Star Trek, and then they started feeding me little dribs and drabs of work from when there weren't movies around, and I worked on a short-lived TV show called Here's Boomer.
Oh God, I remember.
It was just, and I might add, my reel bounced. My very first reel went to the mix. And it was awful because I did a very bad job, and I started to second guess myself. And then during Star Trek, I had made good friends with the supervising sound editor of that film. I was just a line editor, Richard Anderson, and he became a good friend. And there was one of the sound designers, Stephen Hunter Flick, another great name in our community, multi-Academy Award winner. Both of them, we stayed in touch, and they both said, we're leaving Paramount. We're going to go off on our own. And I said, I want to be a part of that. Let's do something together. And so over the course of a couple of months, we determined to start our own company, because at that time, Paramount, along with all the other studios in Hollywood, were divesting themselves of their departments to get rid of,
the overhead,
punching overhead. The accountant said, get rid of these departments. They're killing your bottom line. So we saw an opportunity to do something with that and maybe pull some of that work into our own company. So we formed our first corporation in 1980, 79 or 80, called Thunder Tracks Limited. And the three of us hung out a shingle in Hollywood at the old Technicolor facility in Hollywood and rented some editing rooms. And again, fate steps on us. My partner, Richard Anderson, went to USC's film school with Ben Burt. And Ben called and said, hey, Rich, I got a movie I want to do with you called Raiders of the Lost Ark. Steven wants to do it in LA. He doesn't want to come up to Marin to do the post sound work. So we're going to do this together. And so all of a sudden we're like, whoa, here we go. And we're put on the map, within a year.
Right.
And Ben and Richard would win Academy Awards for Raiders. I was lucky to be tagging along and meeting my hero within 2 years of starting a career. And I got to meet Ben and talk and share information and do stupid stuff. I mean, Ben was a genius, and he'd record all these things and he'd make all these great sounds and he'd send them down to us and say, put them here and here and here. And I didn't know any better, and I didn't use any of his sounds. And I'll never forget Ben hearing my first reel, which was the gunfight in the Raven Bar.
Right.
The Nazis want to steal the medallion, and Mary.
Right. Toad getting his hand. Yeah.
Right. So I didn't use any of Ben's sounds. I just used a bunch of shitty sounds from our library. And I never forget sitting on the curb with Ben at Goldwyn Studios and him saying very politely, those punches didn't sound right. Didn't I send you some? I said, and I literally said, yeah, but I didn't like them. So I used these other ones.
Man.
So we had a nice chat, and I learned a lot of things about respect and protocol.
And let me guess, pretty soon those punches made it into your
They
reel.
got back into the scene.
And thankfully, none from Ben Burt to you. I know a punch you could use. Wow.
I will commend Ben till my dying breath. He was so gentlemanly then, as he is every day. If I called him today, he's just a lovely person. So
you then made, at least you got Spielberg's, or your company got Spielberg's attention.
Yeah. And then I want to get the sequence right. So after Raiders, now we've got a shingle. Everybody knows us. My partner is an Academy Award winner. And so we started getting offers all over the place. And so the next film we did, close to the next film, was Poltergeist, the Tobe Hooper, Steven Spielberg Poltergeist.
Right.
And that we did. No more. Ben's now off doing his thing in Marin. And we did a great job on Poltergeist. And Richard and Steven would be nominated for an Oscar for that. And that introduced us, that made us even sort of more valuable
to Amblin,
in the Amblin universe. And I think Joe Dante, when he decided to do Gremlins, already knew Richard Anderson from long ago, because
From like the
from
Corman
like
years?
Corman days.
Yeah.
I think Richard had done stuff maybe even for Joe in the Corman days. I can't remember what it might have been. Hollywood Boulevard, but I think that was.
Did you guys work on ET or no?
No, we were. Those were that was parallel with Gremlin. I mean,
Gremlin.
with Poltergeist.
Poltergeist, yeah.
Poltergeist, right?
Yeah,
Because I was working on all the movies you worked on up at ILM. So it's
Right,
funny.
who
Like,
knew?
no wonder
Who
we
knew?
became friends
sensed
quickly.
you.
Yeah.
You were. There was a disturbance in the force.
I have a question about Poltergeist, because one of the greatest sounds in that is the sound of Carol Ann coming through the TV.
Right.
And it's literally haunting. Who had the idea for reversing the reverb on that thing? Because it's so cool.
That was Alan Howarth, at that time, and still to this day, a highly regarded musician, composer, sound designer. He did all those early scores with John Carpenter,
Right.
co-wrote, co-recorded, co-performed. And Alan knew of that technique from his musical days, recording instruments and being in the studio. And we were, thrashing about for something to do to that voice. And we knew we didn't want to just leave it to the mix and put a futz on it or a reverb or something like that. And Alan brought that to it.
Because it's so great and so iconic.
Yeah. Alan, too, by the way, in case I forget and we don't get to it, Alan brought the vibrato to Gizmo's singing. When we'll jump ahead to Gremlins for a second.
Sure.
We knew Gizmo needed, in the script, Chris Columbus speaks about the Mugwai singing. And we didn't know, and we tried all sorts of things. I tried taking squirrel sounds and pitching them, and none of my tricks worked. And Jerry Goldsmith recommended that he had a lovely young girl with a great falsetto in his choir, and he recorded her and to Jerry's melody. And Joe handed it to me and said, "Make this sound like a Mugwai." And because it sounded like a 13-year-old girl singing, and it was Alan who introduced this modulation. So instead of he put
right,
and then I just put cat purr underneath it and
got the shrill into it.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
Well, so okay, between that and what did you do, or anything remarkable after Poltergeist before Gremlins?
Everything remarkable, Kirk.
Well, he hasn't remarked upon it yet.
Let's see. We did one of MGM's. Remember MGM Studios? God rest their soul. We did their biggest budget film ever, Pennies from Heaven.
Right, Steve Martin.
A Depression era movie with Steve Martin that just bombed. And I tell you, it was one of the most painful experiences in my career, going to the audience preview and watching an audience watch a film with Steve Martin and wanting to laugh and thinking every line was the setup for a joke that never came.
Right.
And within 20 minutes, 25 minutes, walkouts.
Wow.
It's the worst thing in the world for a director.
Have you ever seen the British version of it, which is much more closely related to the actual material?
No.
It works. It works when it's done as a dark comedy, not Steve Martin being all happy. There's a genius. It was a British, I guess a BBC or British TV miniseries.
I remember.
It's great. It's dark as fuck, but it's great. And it was based on the author's life. He had some horrible skin disease, so it's kind of like his projections into this fantasy world. But I was one of the
movie of the year.
Who doesn't want to see a Depression era movie?
Well, I went being a huge Steve Martin fan, not knowing anything, going, "Oh, Pennies from Heaven, okay, it's a musical, great, Steve Martin musical. How could it possibly be? Oh my god!" I remember I didn't walk out, but I was like, "It's gonna get better." Like, no, it's gonna get. This is gonna make sense. Yeah,
he talks about it in his autobiography, and he was so devastated by the response to that because he loved doing that.
He really did. I did the ADR. I sat in the recording studio 10 times, and it was just him and I and Herb Ross, and he put everything into it. He was determined to do the tap dancing himself and do the singing when he could, and
Did he actually put the lipstick on her nipples? Was
Yeah,
that...
he did. He did.
That's what
I knew you would do that. I knew you'd go there.
Well, no, because I mean that's where I'm like, what is happening?
That's acting.
I'm like, this movie just took a weird left turn, which normally I'd be like, that sounds great. But you're like, what?
Let me do a sound geek moment on Pennies from Heaven. The other thing I was challenged with is re-recording all the tap dancing because, of course, on set you couldn't use those recordings because it's playback, right?
Yeah.
So you have to reproduce all the sound, and we all wanted a really Hollywood, like golden era of Hollywood tap dancing sound. And I found out through the head engineer at the scoring stage that Gene Kelly and Fred Astaire, who had both made movies at MGM, had researched the best sound surfaces in the studio. They had gone to every sound stage, and they had designated a 3-foot square section of parquet on the scoring stage as my spot for doing tap dancing. And that was where we were going to do the tap dancing until we were told that the floor had been ripped up since they had done those recordings, but they could tell us how he did it. And we had the construction department build a wooden pallet to the specifications that Gene and Fred had determined yielded the best sound with tap shoes. We built that as a huge pallet so we could get at least 8 dancers on it. And we brought that to the Tadeo scoring stage and recorded our dancers on that.
Wait, and they had to match picture?
Well, there's another geeky nerd. Here's a geeky nerd story. God bless Steve. He was pretty darn good at tap dancing, but you know, if you're a geek like us, we're movie cineasts, filmmakers, you know, sound geeks, and you can tell when the sound of the footfall isn't in sync with the image because the dancer isn't dancing on the beat. And so the lesser dancers, the actors, not the paid professionals around them in those big chorus lines, they didn't tap on the beat. And so there was always this challenge of recording to the score and it landing on the beat, but then, it doesn't match the frame. Now what are we going to do? So now we have this dance with picture editorial of, okay, on the close-up of Steve here, give me 1 frame ahead and roll the cut.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'll go into the audio recording and I'll make up the additional frame by pulling it up and adding it at the end.
Slip and slide. Yeah,
slip and slide. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And so this was surgery for weeks and weeks and weeks.
That's amazing.
And then nobody liked it.
How do you go about recording that so it doesn't sound distorted and it sounds like it's still worldized?
Very carefully.
We did it in the same kind of environment that Fred and Gene Kelly had done. We brought it to the biggest
in the sound stage,
scoring stage, which is where they recorded theirs, and that gave it ambience. And we learned the microphone that they liked, the distance from the feet, up above, down below. So we tried to get as much of it right as we possibly could to give it that feel. Yeah, it was really a fun deep dive.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So
all these things you don't think about at all when you're watching a movie.
That's the point.
And like you said, you shouldn't. But I love that depth.
But now I literally want to go back and watch that movie, which I've had no desire to watch again in my life. I mean, not even for the lipstick nipples.
Yeah, no, don't try to fool any of us, Kirk.
Oh, the lipstick nipple scene. I almost remembered that. It is the first thing that popped into mind because it was so weird. And it was
by the way, speaking of lipstick nipples, and who doesn't want that as
we now have a title for this episode.
I remember now that was then a visual effect because in color timing they enhanced the red to make the nipple stand out more.
Right.
As you do.
As we do.
As you do. Or you can use an ice cube. Either way. Anyway, they iced the lipstick. Enough nipple talk. So, okay, now you get Gremlins, right? Roughly, more or less. All right.
Yeah.
So you were designing before the shoot, like when you were doing Mogwai singing, or were they because I don't remember filming to a soundtrack for Mogwai for Gizmo singing.
Yeah. Joe, being the progressive filmmaker that he was, recognized that sound, especially for Gremlins, wasn't just going to be post-production. He couldn't wait for sound to get started, and especially the Gremlin voices. So I came on 9 months before the release of the film. You guys were already into filming somewhat.
Right.
But Joe wanted us to have more of a symbiotic process and what would end up happening as I developed sounds and experimented, Joe would land on something he likes and then he'd play it for you guys. And in fact, I think you came to my studio a couple of times to hear my experiments, and that would, I think you've said, act as some kind of emotional fodder as you're doing the
Now, where did our good friend, rest in peace, Mark Dodson fit? Was that all post, or did you bring him in when you were doing the designs for the voices?
Mark was very clever. He had done the voice of Salacious T. Crumb, and which had some sort of connective tissue to what he thought might be gremlin sounds, because he looked kind of like a gremlin. He's about this dude with a funny little beak.
Sculpted by the exact same guy, actually.
Oh, really?
Not designed. So Tony designed Salacious. Chris designed the gremlin, but Tony ultimately sculpted the gremlin. So
no kidding.
Same hand, yeah.
Yeah. So Mark dug me up and said, I want to audition for the gremlin voices. And by the way, I did Salacious T. Crumb. And I thought, oh, that's great. I love that. The little cackle that he does. And so he came in and I just put him through the paces. I had a massive list of all the kinds of things I need: cackles, laughs, wheezes, groans, whatever, and just shoved him through the meat grinder and recorded it. And I still have that 45-minute audition tape where in the middle of it, under a prompt from me to give me a classic gremlin laugh, he made the cackle that I think is the signature sound of the movie. That I can't do it. And that's when I was like, oh, we're done here.
So is that what you played for us? Because I'm trying to remember if Mark was the one that sort of inspired when we were filming and going with that.
Yes, because I didn't know that. So, for example, I had just deconstructed the entire bar scene, and there's 50 bits that have to. There's a Frank Sinatra gremlin. There's a guy spinning on a
guys playing poker. Yeah, there's
guy. So I would just say, okay, give me a Sinatra gremlin, give me a Bubba gremlin, give me a Flasher gremlin. So and he just like an improv routine, he just knock them out. And so that's the kind of stuff I was putting on a cassette tape, because Joe always went to set with a Sony Walkman and he'd listen to music, but in some cases he'd listen to the gremlin voice developments, and he would tell me that he'd be listening to experiments, and every now and then there'd be this sort of serendipitous cohesion where it'd be like a sound landed on a movement you guys did, and he'd call me and say, that sound works.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, because I mean, I was there for the bar scene, and the movie theater scene is where he brought in the extra puppeteers, because I'd built in Gremlins, but I was I'd moved back to LA. It was UCLA or something. But for the big scenes, they brought us in. And I remember I spent 2 days doing with both hands up with Phoebe Cates right in front of me. And I was two of the things behind the bar.
Right.
And we were doing ours.
Looking up her skirt or something like that.
Well, my nose was right in her belly button. So, or maybe lower, I don't know. I was trying to crouch, but so we didn't meet on. I'm trying to remember when I actually met you. It might have been in passing. You came to set or something, but I guess we didn't really become friends till Trek 4.
Right. Yeah.
And then, what was the name of your company at that point? Was it still Thunder Tracks? No.
That's 87. We had
no, that was 85, 86.
85, 86. We had changed, and we were now called Screaming Lizard Productions.
That's right. And then you went to Bang Zoom Kapow, because you were changing every 2 years.
Well, the goddamn state of California kept trying to add sales tax to what we do, which is labor, which is
right.
And this was a big problem for all the independents in Hollywood, because they were assessing retroactive sales tax on effectively what was labor. And that's
Yeah,
right.
wrong. We eventually would overturn that legislation, but we had to keep changing our names and being one step ahead of the State Board of
That's why, because I was
Equalization.
like Screaming Lizard, then Bangsham Kapow, then a Weddington. And,
Yeah. Yeah, that's the way it went.
All right, so so Star Trek 4 happens. You and I meet and go like, oh, we kind of know each other from Gremlins and all that. We become pals because of our sound effects nerddom.
Yeah.
And I meet Steve Lee and Flick and Richard.
Yeah.
I met the whole gang. And you brought Alan Howarth in, I remember, to do, I don't know if you brought him in, but to do the whale.
The probe.
The probe.
Yeah, the probe whale noises.
Is there any truth to the fact that it was just a recording of Kirk snoring?
No, it's a much better story than that. Alan had been hired by the production way before I came on. In fact, before shooting started, because Leonard wanted the sound of the probe to be able to be played on set to get authentic, reaction shots from the crew on the bridge when, Kirk says, "Uhura, put it on," whatever, and you hear the probe for the first time. So Alan designed that sound because Alan had worked on the previous 3 Trek films. So he was a veteran. Alan did not continue with me, but he had made that original sound.
Right.
But we would end up swapping that out and I'll tell this story as briefly as I can. I kept trying to redesign the sound of the probe for that beat on the bridge, and Leonard never liked anything. And it would come to pass that we would have to do a temp mix for audience preview, crunch time, and Leonard had still not approved that sound. And when my latest iteration came up in the middle of that mix, Leonard said, "I don't like it. What are we going to do?" And I took professional offense to that. I had already done 10 iterations of it. And arrogantly, I said, "Okay, Leonard, if that's not the sound of the probe, what is?" And he, literally like this went, "Wub, wub, 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 wub."
Right.
And I was like, I was just pissed. I just said, "Okay, put out a mic. We're going to record Leonard and he's going in the movie," thinking everybody will say, no, we can't do that. Well, they put up the mic and Leonard did it right up close. We added a little bit of bass and a little bit of reverb, and that's what's in the movie today.
I did not. Well, I was there and don't even remember that, but I do know it's like basically, whoa, 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 whoa.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a great story. That's an
Mark,
Easter egg.
why are you playing me all this garbage?
Oh, turn the knife. Twist the knife.
I don't like it.
I'll tell you what twisted the knife even more. When in the early, there was a producer on the film, and I respect her deeply, but she didn't quite understand how we work. And in some of those early demo sessions, I was playing sounds that weren't landing. And I remember her announcing just out loud to everyone in the room, "That sounds like record scratching."
Yeah. So does your voice.
Wow, tough room. I gotta tell you, no respect.
Yeah.
Well, so as I've told a million times, my voice is in the movie, which was not originally intended. Again, because Leonard wanted something live on set, and it was the dialogue, which you guys didn't do that much, so you sped it up a little bit. For me, going, "Who said logic is the cement of our civilization?"
That's your original recording from a little you did. I didn't touch it.
You didn't, but I was told they put a little bit, you sped it up or something. Put a little bit of like digital harmonics. I know it wasn't much.
The genius of it was all in your sort of bootstrapped recording version.
Which I think I just did, I don't know, on set with a mic, with just a lav mic or something. Also, I wrote all those questions. So
I know you did.
Yeah, I mean, anyway.
And you did the computer confirmation. You did the bing vocally instead of putting a sound effect for it.
Correct.
How do you feel? How do you feel? Well, it's funny because I was like, well, I know what Star Trek computers sound like because I grew up watching the show. Like, it wasn't Majel Roddenberry or Majel Barrett at that point doing.
At some point, yes.
Yeah, doing the working.
Yeah.
I just was working. So I'm like, it was just me doing a bad. Anyway, okay, so you do Star Trek. We become best friends.
Oh no, we gotta get to the music.
Yeah.
Go, give
What,
the lead.
I don't know what you're talking about. What music?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Leonard
You
Rosenman.
mention it every other episode.
Leonard Rosenman did this really weird score. Wait, is that not what? Oh, okay. Speaking of the whale sound, as I recall, Leonard came in to hear more versions of whatever that whale song was.
Yeah.
And we kind of shanghaied him and said, hey, by the way, because I've told the story how I got even to get him to listen to. So I came to you because I wrote the song lyrics in about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't know music from banging a drum. Right. I know you play guitar. And so you turned it into like basic rock, like punk rock chords. There's like 3 or 4 chords.
3 chords. And
I remember we recorded it on just the slate mic so it sounded shitty in the hallway.
Yeah.
So really, we wanted to sound like a garage band.
Yeah.
And then, you guys had recorded it first.
Right.
With the drum. So
bass, drum, and guitar. And but as I remember, you would kind of quietly sing along so we could follow you, but we weren't miking you at the time.
Right. And then I'd written it to follow right when I flip them off to say, screw you.
Right.
So we kind of timed it so that would hit right there. And then I remember Leonard coming in and we said, hey, while you're here, we've got this. And I remember he put it on the headphones. It's like a movie clip in my head. Yeah. And I listened to it and I'm just going, basically like smelling apart. Like, and I remember he took it off. We said, well, what do you think? He goes, it's terrible. And we're all like, fuck. And he goes, so it's perfect.
Yeah.
That's right. So yeah, he liked that instantly. He took an entire fucking season or year to get the whale probe noise.
But that was music, as I like to say, that will last to lunchtime.
Yeah. All right.
I'm very proud of it. We just knocked it out. We recorded it in like 20 minutes and overdubbed the vocals, and
I think that's why it works. It was not overthought. And then
that's the magic of the movies, boys.
Yeah. Cut.
Wait, but now the footnote to that is that Leonard, we got the chance at it because the studio had a deal with Capitol Records and they were sending over Pablum, and Leonard didn't like any of it. So cue Kirk.
Well, I told him that's not punk music. It was really like we could do Duran or Pet Shop Boys. I'm like, no.
Yeah.
I remember saying that could be Ramones, Dead Kennedys, TSOL, the Nickies, and I remember the music guy's face like, no, we're not going to do a deal.
But then the follow up to the song is that it started to become enjoyable to some, and somebody in the studio said we should do a music video. This is back when MTV was a thing. And they wanted to shoot Kirk and I on the bridge of the Enterprise doing I Hate You.
What? I don't remember this.
That was nixed because of the contractual obligations between Capitol and Paramount. Right. But you and I, for about 5 minutes, had a shot of dressing up and going on the bridge of the Enterprise, which was still standing on a soundstage.
So here's the thing. We need to do that with using AI backgrounds and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, let's do it now, or we'll do both versions. Because, we can make ourselves look like we did then.
Can we put ourselves legally on the bridge of the Enterprise?
As long as you don't have any logos in it.
It could be similar. If it's a long enough lens, you could just, I don't know. That part, I don't know. But I know I know you and I could be a video and we could just do punk version. If you do a Xerox of it and like make it look punk, like it's a photo that's Xerox.
Totally. Well, conversely, I'm going to, after we're done here, I'm going to take that scene and I'm going to edit in a Pet Shop Boys song into the boombox.
I want to please share that with your By the way, in case you want to get a sense of how this might or how I might look, I was offered to do the sound on a movie and I turned it down. And they said, what if we gave you a role in the movie? Would you do the sound for our movie? And I said, okay. And they cast me as a punk zombie. And they gave me an orange mohawk. And you can see me on screen in a horrible horror film called Life on the Edge.
Oh, my goodness.
So if you want to see what I look like with the mohawk, go look at Life on the Edge.
Well, we're going to again because you're going to do this video.
That's right. I would love that. We'll get John P. just shoot in front of a green screen. Okay, so Trek comes out. It does well. It does really well, actually.
Yeah.
Did you work with Leonard on any of his other movies or no?
I did. I did The Good Mother and Three Men and a Baby.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah,
'Cause
we
I
had
knew
a
you guys-
great time together.
Yeah, he was awesome.
Yeah.
And then okay, Oscar noms. Just because we're getting into the middle of your career.
Yeah.
What movies did you get nominated for? Trek 4, I know.
Trek 4 was the first, then Aladdin, and then The Fifth Element, and then Mad Max Fury Road, then Blade Runner 2049, then Dune Part 1.
What was it like working with? Okay, well, we'll get to Gremlins, but I'm just curious. What was it like working on Fifth Element with that crazy French director,
Luc Besson.
Luc Besson? Yeah, what was that like?
An amazing one-off that will never be reproduced ever again. I had this really kind of cartoonish idea of what I thought French directors would be like elusive, effete, distanced, above it all.
A hands-on guy.
Well, but here's the interesting thing about his hands-on. What in that short list of descriptions of what a French director might be like should now include respect for the craftspeople that they surround themselves with. So I'll tell this via a story. I was on that film for about 9 months, and Luke brought me on very early to start designing things that weren't even visual affected yet. And my first task was to make the sounds of the air cars, like the taxi that Corbin Dallas flies around.
The Jetson cars.
Yeah, the Jetson cars. And I built a bunch of sounds, and a couple weeks in, I went out and played him the sounds, and he loved them, and he gave me the next assignment: make the Creek, the alien voices, make the Mondoshaans and the Mangalores. Went off, came back in 2 weeks and rung the office and said, "I'm ready to play stuff for Luke." And they said, "He doesn't need to hear it. It's okay. Just keep going." And I got another assignment from the film editor, and this happened for another month or so until I discovered, and I think the film editor, Sylvie Landry, would say to me, "Luke trusts you. You don't need to do this.
Wow.
Just send me the sounds." And it was the least micromanaged. In fact, there was zero micromanagement.
Wow.
Much less major management or macro management. He just, and I would hear this from Sylvie, the editor, that he trusted everybody. He treated every department that way. He knew he had hired just great people in every department. And he let them do this, so much so that at the beginning of the 9 months, I did that one session with him. He didn't hear any of my work until the final mix.
Wow.
He did not attend pre-dubs, dialogue, sound effects, didn't go to scoring because he trusted Luke Serra, who did the score.
Right.
And he would only show up at the final mix. And he
or he's a lazy bastard who's like, it can't be done. That's amazing. No, I've heard that he's very obviously intensely creative, and he does. I mean, he has to respect the crafts because he uses them all the time. He's not a guy who does three people in a car. And all his movies, from all the way back to Le Dernier Combat, his first one with Jean Reno.
There's, for as much as I'm speaking glowingly about this process, and I still believe in it, there are little downsides. And that came about in the playback of Reel 2, our second or third day with him in Final Mix. We're playing the big attack where the Mangalores and the Mondoshaans are being attacked, and they plummet to the planet and crash and explode. And that was meant to be, and it's laid out as and shot as an epic Star Wars-like battle, attack on the Death Star. Right. And so I spent months building spaceship sounds and alien weaponry sounds and everything that would happen, and explosions and everything. And when Luke heard it, I remember, I'll never forget, the lights came up and he turned to me specifically and he said, "Mark, I deeply apologize. We never talked about this. When Eric and I wrote the script, because he and Eric grew up as kids together, they wrote that story as 13-year-olds. A very simple love story. That's all it is." Right. And then they added the science fiction stuff. He said, "Eric and I always imagined this as an operatic moment in the story, and we only ever heard it with music." And while I appreciate everything that you've done, I have to hold true to that original intention. And so he took out almost everything out of this epic, attack on the Death Star sequence that I was really proud of. But all of that would it all fit into moments later in the film, like at the end of the movie, when they finally figure out the puzzle inside of that pyramid and they release those things and the thing beams up to the bad. Inversely, I had built that as also a huge sonic, majestic, almost semi-musical choral moment. And he realized that the score didn't fit in that beat, and he took everything out and he let the apotheosis of the film play out with just sound effects, no dialogue, no music.
Nice.
He was always searching for what's right for the movie.
I'm a huge fan of his work and the stuff that doesn't even play in the States.
Oh, Le Femme Nikito is one of my favorite films of all time.
Well, he made a great movie, sort of the adventures of Madeleine Blanc-Sec, which means dry white. It was based on a French graphic novel, but imagine a female Indiana Jones at the turn of the century in Paris. There's mummies and pterodactyls, and it's beautifully shot, and it's wonderful and fun and very Indiana Jones. Kind of what you thought Indiana Jones might turn into, kind of Indiana Jones meets the Mummy, or that Mummy vibe that Stephen name did. But great, all his movies I enjoy. He's even made some animated features. Again, they all show in Europe. They don't show them here.
He's a great filmmaker. What an experience that was!
Wow. Okay, so Gremlins 2, where we really became buddies.
Finally, I don't know what's taking so long.
But you've done a lot.
Yeah,
and we need to cover it, especially the highlights.
Well,
so
the Gremlins 2, I just loved the Gremlins franchise, and I was really happy to be back and feeling sort of a huge sigh of relief that we had kind of built the Gremlins universe, and I didn't have to invent something other than the specifics to this movie.
Right.
And what I don't remember is somehow you and I had gotten on this sort of voiceover thing because you didn't do voices for the first film.
No, I just done them on set, and I think you and Joe had heard it. But I know you were the one who said, "Hey, what do we need? We got so many Gremlins. What if we bring someone else in?"
Right. Yeah. And
I remember that Mark and I we already knew Mark from Lucasfilm because he was a carpenter there, and so we'd been friends, and I crossed paths with him because I had done some auditioning for Ben on Jedi. But I mean, Mark and I were acquaintances, I would say. So, but I remember going into that, and he and I bonded immediately because we're both goofballs that make weird. And I remember Howie and Frank were very standoffish. They weren't mean, but they would just like at lunchtime they would go off, and then three of us would hang out, or even with Joe. But Mark was amazing, and we had so much fun. But we did that movie for almost 2 weeks, right? Because of the first was everything in the English version, and then there were 3 other languages. I know it was German.
Yeah, with the figs, as we call them, French, Italian, German, Spanish. We did because we didn't want some goofball foreigners screwing up our Gremlinese. You remember any of those crazy translations instead of like
yes. I remember things like going up and going down in German for like outwards, like going up outwards, going down outwards. And I mean, for some reason that stuck out. Oh, nudie was in German. Nackensee.
That's right. And woof was wow.
Right. Wow. Yeah. And that whole movie theater breaking down was weird because we had to that was the most English they spoke. Usually it was like froyo or one word. This was like, I don't even know if the Lincoln bit made it, 7 years ago. I don't know if we translated that. I think that stayed in English because it was an American president gag. But
I remember how painful it was doing those huge group scenes where we needed 1,000 gremlins, and even Joe jumped up to the mic, and I jumped up just doing.
Well, I remember we would do for Mark and I would do low gremlin, which was, and then we do high gremlin, which is more that. So it would give a layering effect.
Exactly.
And then the moment for me was the electricity gremlin.
Oh, I was just gonna get to the electric because that was. you brought some real character to that, because I was struggling to make it feel interesting just with electricity sounds, which just weren't landing at all.
Right. And I remember it was like, sure, let me try something, because everyone's like, I got nothing. So I just went up and did my robot-y thing, but it was almost
do it, because it's so good. It's such a signature of that.
Well, there were two. There was the voice, which I call it, which was like, and then there was the buzzing, which was more the electricity part, which was which is more like the death ray from like War of the Worlds.
War of the
But I remember
Worlds,
you did it together, but I remember doing that take and almost popping a vein. It was because it was one continuous take.
Yeah.
That was fun. I think that and then doing Greta, which was the female gremlin.
Oh, that last scene with Bob Picardo in the elevator is such a great moment.
And I'm just doing Miss Piggy with like if she gargled with Drano. But that was 2 weeks of work. I still get residual checks because I mean they're not huge. But, that was the most fun I've had. I've done some other voice stuff, but that, I mean, again, it was like 2 weeks work, and it was working with you and Dodson, who became a good friend. Yeah.
Well, imagine what it's like for me, feeling just sort of that sense of relief, knowing I got people that got my back.
Right.
Whereas the first Gremlins, I was on my own trying to make it from scratch. That was high anxiety.
Yeah. Well, and Joe was there. I mean, Joe wasn't there watching. He was jumping in, like you said. He would jump in. I remember there was a gremlin in the bathtub, and the gag is going in the bathtub, and Joe didn't like any of the way we did it, so he goes, "I'm going to do it." He walks up. And we're all like,
yeah. And then he walked up. He walked up to the microphone and went, whoa, 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 whoa.
It's in the movie. I can't think of everything.
All right, so you did Gremlins. You've done so many movies.
159 to date. Wow,
not bad.
Yeah.
And 6 nominations and 2 wins. I mean, that's pretty good odds.
Let me tell you why you're thinking of the next thing to ask me about. I'll tell you a Howie Mandel story, because Howie Mandel ends up on the first Gremlins through Frank Welker, because they were buds in Canada, and Howie was still in Canada. And I told Frank Welker, one of the great voiceover artists of our generation, arguably our Mel Blanc. I told Frank I wasn't landing a voice for Gizmo, and he said, "You got to try my buddy Howie." And so, okay, I'll just have him in. Called, and by the way, I interviewed 75 voiceover, and I did it all myself. I had no casting department. I called agents myself, and his agent sent him over, and I'm going to tell Howie's telling of this story of meeting me. At that time, trying to be a full-service sound designer, I was trying to figure out how many ways can Gremlin sound different. And one of the things I landed on was primal screaming. So I thought, this is something people do. So for a day, I brought in voiceover people that do primal screaming. And so for hours and hours on end, for one day, people were just, and that's what was emanating out of my office, which, by the way, was in a medical building.
Nice.
I was across the hall from me was a gynecologist. So as Howie tells it, he gets into the elevator on the first floor, going to the second floor with a woman. And as the elevator arrives at my floor and the doors open, she steps out to hear. She turns, gets back in the elevator. Howie gets out, and she takes it back down to the first floor.
That's amazing. That's hilarious. So, because he had that voice he used for his kid show, Bobby, yeah. That's the Memo voice. So, did he immediately do that, or did he try different stuff and landed on it?
Yeah, he did. I didn't know Bobby, but he landed on Bobby in the middle of our audition. He tried. I walked him through all the ideas. Right. And it wasn't until I heard the Bobby voice I thought, I think that's right for us. We need an endearing, lovable character, even if it's derivative. And I didn't know that. Joe didn't sense that either.
Well, it works. I mean, I don't know. It's so different visually that you're doing it, but you're like, when you hear it's Howie Mandel, you're that makes sense.
I'll never forget to try to cut it a little bit. I added these really unusual cat purrs to everything that Gizmo did. So even if Gizmo said, Gizmo caca, I put with these cat purrs.
Interesting.
And when we played the first mix for Steven Spielberg, he said, I'm not so sure about those cat purrs. You know, we're doing that on my other movie, which was E.T. Because then that's what E.T. was doing in between vocalizations.
Yeah, that kind of throaty purr.
But I pitched it hard. I said, no, we have to make Gizmo cuddly.
Yeah, it worked. All right.
That's amazing.
So 2 Oscar noms. Obviously, every job you do, you're trying to...
2 Oscar wins.
2 Oscar wins. Sorry. 6 Oscar noms. So were you surprised that those are the ones that won? Or, I mean, I know you kill yourself on everything. So it's not like, well, I phoned this in. But what about... So the first one was Furiosa.
Yeah. Mad Max Fury Road.
Fury Road.
Sorry,
important distinction.
Yeah. And so you got to work with Richard Miller, right? Richard Miller.
No, George Miller.
George Miller.
Yeah.
I knew it was Miller. I blanked on the first name. And what was that like?
Boy, that was Film Academy. George is a genius in everything that he does, and I learned so many techniques that I'm using today that make me even a better sound designer. Really? One of the things that I learned from George, I don't know why, but I grew up, I never understood what it meant to be an artist. And I had this sort of twisted idea of what artists do, which is they have moments of genius. They have these epiphanies that come out in huge ideas. And I'd spent my career always trying to, use a baseball metaphor, hit it out of the park. Got to do Gremlins, got to hit it out of the park. And I learned from George the polar opposite of that, of the value of a long, George taught me to work in short brush strokes, like a pointless painting. He's, where you're always only ever trying to achieve a very small thing over a long period of time, such that at the end of it, in the aggregate, you've achieved a great thing.
Right.
And
it's a marathon.
Yeah, it really was. To give you an idea of how much of a marathon it was in post for 2 years. I've never heard of a movie being in post that long. We final mixed the movie. A final mix generally in a traditional studio movie, $100 million movie, you final mix for 2 weeks, something like that. We final mixed for 75 days and did it. Wow. Did it 3 times.
For why? Why the 3 times?
The first final mix we did was for our first audience preview, but it was always understood that this is the first time George was going to show it to the studio. So we spent a month and a half on a temp mix to show it to the studio. The second final mix that we did was at my request because I got brought on Mad Max Fury Road as a film doctor or a sound doctor. George's team rung me saying, the movie doesn't sound right. We need help. Do you want to come to Australia and help us get it on its feet? I went for 8 weeks. I did triage, but it wasn't what I would have done had I started from the very beginning. I wanted a new foundation, and I pitched that to George, and he responded to it. And I pitched it such that I felt I had to bring it back to Los Angeles with crew that I knew and knew what they would deliver. And he bit on that idea as well as a huge additional expense to the budget, 6 figures to redo the sound the way I wanted to do it. And that begat the second final mix. And now I get to tell my fairy tale, my favorite fairy tale of all time. So the second final mix was bring it to LA, rethinking almost all of the sound, and then bringing that to audience preview. The first preview, as you probably know and your viewers know, in previews, they hand out these cards and you fill them out so that they can get a numerical score of their enjoyment for the movie. And this is critical to a studio to assessing its value and its potential. In the first preview in October of 2015, we got a 78. We redid the movie at my original request, bring it to LA, redo the sound. And it's important to know as a footnote that the edit didn't really change. We were really doing sound. I mean, the cut, of course, they take a couple of frames off of a close-up. The score had already been recorded and laid in. So it was materially the same movie. So we brought it to LA, we did the mix, and we previewed in Torrance, and we got an 88. We went up 10 points because sound was different. Let me say that again, because accounting departments in every studio know that each zero, each digit has a dollar figure attached to it. We gained 10 points because sound got better. Can I get an amen?
Amen.
As any filmmaker knows, sound is 50% of your movie. It's weird because psychologically, I mean, watch a movie with the sound off. Watch Star Wars with the sound off. It's like, oh, okay, and then you put the sound in, and including the music.
Yeah.
Okay, so that went up 10 points, and then the final mix.
So the studio so the movie got better, but the studio and George got in a big fight because the studio wanted a PG-13, but George had final cut, and he didn't want a PG-13. And so the studio, behind his back, kind of in front of his back, hired another editor and built a PG-13 version of the movie. And they asked me to work on it because I had the keys to everything. And I said, no, George is my boss. I refused to work on it. I handed them the stems from the old mix, but I didn't want anything to do with it. And they gave me notes like, hold on to yourself, we want to revoice all of those Australian sounding characters in ADR. The very heart and soul of George's movie. This gives you an idea of how out of touch studio executives can be.
Oh, trust me, you do not have to tell that story.
George was in shock. And so they, in parallel track, as we headed towards our final mix, our third final mix, they made a PG-13 version and George made his version. And we previewed them side by side in the same, I think it was, Hawthorne. And we outscored by about 5 points as our R-rated version. And the studio relented. To their credit, George made a better version, and they understood that. And George, though, just to be George, he was so angry about them interfering and wasting money that he went back and on whenever somebody shoots a gun and you see the repercussions, you used to just see a bullet hit. He added blood splatter just to poke the studio. He added blood splatter on every gunshot.
Oh my God, that's amazing. All right, we're a little over time, but I want to talk about Dune.
Okay.
So it's okay. My first thing about you're doing Dune, it's going to be mainly seen on television, right? It's a streaming thing, right?
What?
Was it released in theaters?
No.
Okay, I didn't know it was released in theaters.
Wait a minute. Let's get back to the red nipples, because somewhere we got to get back to this.
Okay, wait. Who produced Dune?
Legendary Entertainment.
For
Warner Brothers.
Okay.
Released by Warner Brothers.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess I just saw it on streaming. I thought, all right.
No, it's the Denis Villeneuve.
I know what it is. I saw it, but I saw it on streaming, so I guess I went.
No, this was a blockbuster.
It was huge.
Yeah.
Where were you?
I was like, nah.
So here's a fun story about Dune, and there's lots of fun stories. That was done during the pandemic. That was 2019, and I did almost all of Dune from this little home studio. And what that meant was, unlike traditional protocols where I build these big Dolby Atmos moments of worms and spaceships and ornithopters, and we'd bring Denis in and hit play and knock his socks off, we couldn't do that. Denis could only hear the work we were doing over headphones in Montreal at home.
Wow.
So Denis would be constantly importuning us. Is it big enough? Do you got the subwoofer in there? I just want to make sure this is gonna land.
So my question is appropriate. What was it like to accept we were only heard over shitty speakers?
Well, it's funny you should say that. It's actually very prescient, Kirk, which doesn't surprise me at all. At the end of Dune, his grandmother saw it on an airline.
Oh God!
And so much of Dune lands in the subwoofer areas to give it, girth and import. And his grandmother even said to him, I'm not sure your movie sounds right. There's there's all this rumble, but nothing seems very big or important. And so I'm sorry, that was on Blade Runner 2049. And that's what Denis importuned us to do on Dune, was to think about his grandmother so it wouldn't play like that on the airline.
Oh my gosh. So that was what about the sequel or the second part 2? Was that all
done by somebody else?
Really?
Another team did Dune Part 2.
Is there a reason?
They had all my sounds. I had built a library. I'd made worms. And
is that a cost cut? In other words, we got all the sounds. We don't need. I mean, that's kind of shocking.
That's my guess, because
especially if you win an Oscar for it, and they're like,
Denis implied that this was a cost measure because they ended up hiring people that aren't Americans and not in the union, and so it felt like. And it's funny, at the end of Dune Part 1, I got a call from the studio asking me to develop the library for the video game, which didn't come out. Yeah. And so I turned over everything, and they had everything. They didn't need Mark Mangini anymore.
Well, idiots, and that one did not get an Oscar, I noticed.
So whatever.
Oh, what a shame.
It's all good.
Jerks.
Dad, I got the Hollywood hug. My goodness.
That's right. With the one finger, the Captain Kirk salute. On the bus salute. Well,
thanks so much for your help.
This has been great. Sorry. This has been great. We love you. Got an Oscar. Good work. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.
And unfortunately, that means we have to say bye-bye as well for this stream. Thank you.
This is the fastest. This just flew by. This has been a gas talking to you guys.
I'm glad.
Yeah. We hope to give everyone gas who listens to us. Well, it helps that I've known you so long because it's easy. But
next time, just start talking about Gremlins first.
Let's get right to the I hate. Cut to the chase.
Okay,
we need to hear more about how Kirk was great and everyone loved him.
Right. It's true. I'm surprised you don't have a Boston. I never knew you were from Boston. I thought you were from Philly because you don't have a Boston accent.
That part of that was my foreign language training.
I was going to say you have a good ear for languages.
I think I have a fairly neutral affect vocally.
Yeah, you don't. No. I mean, God, I work with people from Boston have the wicked hot Boston accent.
Yeah, I kind of have it. Yeah,
it's really unattractive on a beautiful woman.
Yeah, my cousins. It's funny. My cousins all call me Mac, and several of them write me, and they write Mahhhhrk when they address me, Mac.
My God, Mac.
Well, Mac, thank you so much for being with us. This was a lot of fun, and breaking your Saturday morning with us.
What?
Don't hang up when we say goodbye because the
thing has to transfer.
The thing has to do the thing.
I'm waiting. Do the thing. Do it.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us. We'll see you next time. It may not be next week. I'm just saying. But thank you anyway, and we'll see you next time. The Weirded Beardos are Kirk Thatcher and Darren Doctorman. Email them at theweirdedbeardos@gmail.com.